Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well and welcome to this video. In this video, we're going to ask a very important question, which is, could the virus crisis, could the recent shock event with the coronavirus actually cause a major economic recession? In fact, recently we've had Janet Yellen, the former chair of the Federal Reserve, say this in an article that was published, and she believes that it's possible that the coronavirus could cause the next recession. And I want to try and answer this question and whether it's correct or not. So first of all, let me just make this very clear. The stock market is not the same as the economy. The reason why a stock market may go up and down has very little to do with the economy. In fact, what makes a stock market go up and go down has a lot to do with investor behavior and often with other factors like how leveraged they are, margin calls, algorithmic activity, and short sellers. These are subjects that the mainstream media does not talk about because obviously media does not want to confuse people. So it doesn't actually share all the information. But the bottom line is, guys, that the question we're asking is, could the coronavirus story, could it bring about a recession? But the important point is the stock market is not the same thing as the economy. The two are not the same. Let me just give you an example because I realize some of you may need some convincing on this. Cast your mind back to 2009. 2009, we just had one of the worst crashes in history. The market had just dropped by 50%. 2009 happened to be the year that we had one of the highest unemployment rates in history. So remember, guys, in 2009, after the market had crashed, we had massive unemployment rates. We had consumer sentiment being extremely low. We had nothing but bad news, companies going bankrupt, insolvencies, people losing their jobs. All you heard in the news was bad news about the economy. And yet, that year, in 2009, the stock market went up 60%. So just think about that. The market went up 60% when the economy was at its worst shape. Conversely, if you just go back in 2007, all you heard was good news. All you heard was how the market was doing so well, unemployment rates were really low, consumer sentiment was very high, the housing market was doing really great. And what happened? 2007 happened to be the year when the market eventually dropped and started to crash about 50%. So remember, guys, there is a disconnect between what's happening in the economy and the stock market. The two are not the same. The two are not identical. So guys, going back to our original question, could the recent shock event of the coronavirus, could it actually cause the next recession? In case you're wondering why would it cause a recession, the argument is, well, because people are beginning to already become afraid of going out. People are stopping traveling. Firms and businesses are already telling people to not come to work. Stay at home, for example. A lot of businesses and schools have shut down because of the virus fear. And also around the world, fear has gripped the public. And we're seeing people doing less traveling. So this could actually impact the travel industry, the transportation industry, and as well as the economy as a whole, especially if people stop spending money. People stop spending money and start saving, and then, it could affect the transportation and the travel industry. And of course, as a result, the entire business world could be at the start of a major recession. So guys, the question once again is, could the virus actually cause the next recession? And guys, I'm going to show you and demonstrate to you in this video why the answer is no. But it could play a part in the next recession. It's not what everyone thinks it is. Let me explain this point. First of all, what do you need for a recession to start? What are the ingredients of a recession? Take a look at this image you see here. Here are the three ingredients of a fire. What do you need for a fire? You need, first of all, fuel, you need oxygen, and you need heat. You put these three together, fuel, oxygen, and heat, you have a fire. Now, let me ask you this question. What can you add to this equation? What can you add to this ingredient to make the fire happen quicker? The answer, very simply put, is a catalyst. A catalyst is a chemical that often is added to the equation to make the fire happen faster. In other words, to accelerate the rate at which you get to a fire. So guys, it is the same thing with the economy. For the economy to go into recession, you need three ingredients. What are these three ingredients? First, you need fuel. What is the fuel for a recession? You need huge, uncontrollable amounts of debt. Government debt or national debt. As you can see here from this image, guys, the national debt has exploded beyond what you can possibly imagine. In fact, the national debt right now is beyond what it was back in 2008 when we had the last major recession. So we definitely have the first ingredient, huge amounts of debt and artificially low interest rates. Let's remember, guys, the cause of this debt in the first place was because of the action of the Federal Reserve, just printing money, quantitative easing, QE in other words, and keeping the interest rates artificially low for several years. This stock market and this economy has essentially been going up mostly on puff. Nothing but, again, the Federal Reserve just throwing money at the economy and trying to artificially inflate this economy by keeping interest rates low as well. So we got the fuel. What about the oxygen? Do we have the oxygen for a recession? Yes, we have three things for the oxygen. We have, first of all, an inverted yield curve warning. Number two, we have a low PMI reading. And third, we have the Federal Reserve cutting interest rates after raising them. Let me explain these points one by one. We had a recession warning 1 year ago. You might remember, guys, in one of my videos that I posted about a year ago, I think it was July of last year, I made this point before the mainstream media even talked about it, which was we had an inverted yield curve warning. One of the most reliable indications and warnings of a recession is an inverted yield curve. As you can see from this chart, guys, whenever we had an inverted yield curve, whenever the yield curve goes negative, a recession has usually started about 12 months to 18 months later. So the recession doesn't start immediately after an inverted yield curve. It happens about 12 to 18 months later. So in 2006, we had an inverted yield curve. The recession started in 2008. We also had a low PMI warning. So we're seeing a decline in manufacturing. So this is also a very important warning, guys. A low PMI. When the PMI goes below 50, it's also giving an indication the wheels of the economy are beginning to slow down. And finally, guys, the third warning is when the Federal Reserve starts cutting interest rates, especially as an emergency. So we've already seen last year the Federal Reserve cut interest rates, and just recently the Federal Reserve once again cut interest rates as an emergency. And guys, let me tell you, here's an interesting article from John Hussman, the economist. He said this 1 year ago, and it's worth reading it one more time. He says, while investors appear exuberant about the prospect of Fed easing, they seem largely unaware that initial Fed easings have almost invariably been associated with US recessions. They're running toward the fire. And very interesting article by John Hussman there, by the way. He was seeing already signs of a bubble 1 year ago, as so did we in our video, as you may recall from 1 year ago. So guys, the signs of a recession have already been there. It isn't just suddenly we're waking up and seeing we're going to a recession. No, we've known, guys, if you've been watching our videos now for almost a year, you've known that we've had the warnings for a recession from over a year ago. The third factor you need for a recession is the heat. What is the heat? You need a heated stock market. In other words, a bubble in the stock market. Well, guess what, guys? As I mentioned to you 1 year ago, as I mentioned to you even recently, about a month or so ago, we've had bubble warnings in the stock market too. As I showed you this chart, courtesy of Jason Geppert, we mentioned that we had an option speculation index going to extreme levels. Again, a very definite sign of a bubble in the stock market. So guys, we've got the three ingredients, right? We've got the fuel, the huge amounts of debt, artificial low interest rates, we've got the oxygen, all the warnings we just mentioned, and we've got the heat, a bubble in the stock market. But there's something missing here, right? The catalyst. So what is the catalyst? A catalyst is simply something that accelerates the speed at which we get to a recession or the fire. So what could be the catalyst in this situation that could accelerate the speed to which we get to a recession? Well, it could be, in this situation, the virus crisis. Now, just to give you some context, you may recall 20 years ago, we had another bubble in the stock market. You may remember that was in the year 2000, the dot-com bubble. In the year 2000, we had all the ingredients that you could want for a recession. You had the bubble, the heat, you had the fuel, huge amounts of debt. You also had the inverted yield curve warnings, the oxygen. So what was missing was the catalyst. And guys, what was the catalyst for the major crash that started from the year 2000 to the year 2003? It was the 9/11 attacks. The events of 9/11, the September 11th attacks, they accelerated the speed at which we got to a recession. Why? Because after the events of 9/11, people stopped spending, people stopped traveling. People became afraid to travel and actually go out and spend money. And the events of 9/11, therefore, were a catalyst for that major recession that started back in the year 2000 to the year 2003. So what about 11 or 12 years ago? What was the actual catalyst for the major crash we had in the year 2008? Well, as you may recall, guys, we had two banks failing. We had Bear Stearns failing, first of all, Bear Stearns' famous bank going under. People began to withdraw money out of their banks. And also, of course, we had the Lehman Brothers collapse. So all these factors were catalysts for the major recession. And so similarly to previous recessions, it is possible that the virus crisis, again, the coronavirus story, may potentially be a catalyst, not a cause, but a potential catalyst for the next recession. So guys, the bottom line we need to remember is this. The virus crisis is not a cause for the next recession. By the way, if any politician or the Federal Reserve, if they start telling you that the cause of the recession is the virus, guys, it's absolute nonsense, propaganda, and it's lies. Because what they're trying to do, remember, is trying to put the blame away from themselves, away from their own actions of inflating this economy by QE and printing money, but putting it on something else. They're trying to shift the blame and responsibility away from themselves and putting it on something else, in this case being the virus. But guys, let's remember, we've had the warnings of a recession already from a year ago. All the ingredients that I mentioned to you, from the inverted yield curve, from the low PMI, from the Federal Reserve easing, and the huge amounts of government national debt exploding, and also the bubble, the massive bubble in the stock market, all the ingredients for recession were there a year ago. So it's a complete lie and propaganda by the Federal Reserve or politician to say, oh, this virus is responsible and a cause for the next recession. That's not true. We should not believe them. Now, before I finish the video, let me just say this. We don't actually know for a fact that the virus is going to actually act as a catalyst for a recession. We don't know actually it's going to have an impact or not. Is it possible that it could actually act as a catalyst and accelerate the speed to which we get to a recession? Especially people stop going to work and become more afraid to travel, and especially people stop spending money and start saving. Well, yes, that could certainly have an impact. It could accelerate and speed up the process to which we get to a recession, again, a catalyst for a recession, yes. But we don't actually know that for sure yet, so we shouldn't jump to conclusions. Here's what I would say. Pay very close attention to what happens in the next few months with the unemployment rates and the consumer sentiment. Because usually before a recession begins, consumer sentiment peaks. So if we see a peak in consumer sentiment, if people become, less optimistic or less confident about the economy, that could actually be a significant factor that we could be heading towards a recession. The second factor is if we see a gradual, consistent decline in employment rates. So if unemployment rates begin to rise and we see a drop in employment, that could also be another factor, especially if it happens over the next few months.